Bible Answers
with Dr. Al Garza.
All right, welcome back to Bible Answers. I am your host, Dr. Al Garza. All right, today we're going to be discussing a very debated topic regarding Jesus' genealogy. We got to understand that there's a lot of different, controversies regarding the genealogy of Jesus, the 14 generations at the end of at verse 17, referring to that Matthew is only recording 13 generations. Now, we can look at this. If we compare Luke, and we actually believe that Luke is recording Joseph, the husband of Mary, back to King David, and then we also conclude that Matthew is doing the same, then we have to admit there are some serious discrepancies and contradictions within the genealogies. But because Matthew is recording 14 generations 3 times, and then ends with a 13, not 14, then there becomes an issue. A lot of liberal scholars and Jews will point to this direct contradiction in Matthew and explain that Matthew couldn't even get the genealogy right, and then contradicts Luke's genealogy of Joseph if in fact they're recording both back to Joseph, the husband of Mary, back to King David. Now we're going to solve this problem today with a tremendous discovery that's happened within the Hebrew text of Matthew, and actually a couple of them, that actually correct this, that actually explains the actual 14 generations in Matthew accurately, and also corrects many of the translations from the Greek, the Latin, and even our English that actually has Joseph, the husband of Mary. So we need to look at this carefully, because this is a contradiction in itself at its face value. And so now these texts that we have of Hebrew Matthew actually solve this dilemma, this puzzle, this problem that's plagued the church. And also we're going to look at a quote from an early church father in the first century that actually helps us out to understand what the 14 generations is that would have been probably in the original Greek or even Hebrew text of Matthew. So let's take a look at this and let's try and figure this out. So let's take a look at Matthew 1, verses 16 through 17. It says, "And Jacob, the father of Joseph, the husband of Mary, of whom Jesus was born, and is called Messiah. So all the generations from Abraham to David were 14 generations, and from David to the departure to Babylon, 14 generations, and from the departure to Babylon to Messiah, 14 generations." So what we see here is how we have 14 generations, but if you look, it only goes up to Joseph, who is the husband of Mary, which gives you only 13 generations. Now that is the issue, and that's the problem. You don't have 14 generations. Now that is the controversy. That's the alleged contradiction when you compare it to Luke. And again, like I stated before, if you have both of these genealogies of Matthew and Luke going only to Joseph, the husband of Mary, then Jesus is not a direct descendant of David through the bloodline, through the genealogy. Because again, Joseph is not the biological father of Jesus. We need to have both parents. We need to have Joseph and we need to have Mary going back to King David. That would solve any contradiction or alleged contradiction. Again, we've had many people on YouTube. You can look this up on YouTube, Jesus' genealogy. They go through painstaking, explanations to try and show that Joseph goes back on both Matthew and Luke accurately. But again, even if you try that hard to do so, you don't have a bloodline. Joseph is not the biological father. We need to have Mary. So we're going to look at this carefully, and I want to point first to Clement of Alexandria, the first century church father, who actually gives us insight to what we're going to see in the Hebrew Matthew text. Now, most of this has not really been studied and seen, and in depth as we are doing here. But I want you to look at what Clement of Alexandria says about the genealogy of Matthew and what he believes, what he was looking at that time, which is not what we are looking at today. It looks like he was looking at a different text that solves the issue that we're going to see in the Hebrew Matthew. So let's take a look at what Clement of Alexandria has to say. We have Clement of Alexandria of the first century. And here's what we have him saying. And in the gospel according to Matthew, the genealogy which begins with Abraham is continued down to Mary, the mother of the Lord. For it is said, from Abraham to David are 14 generations, and from David to carry away into Babylon are 14 generations, and from carrying away into Babylon till Messiah are likewise other 14 generations. This is 3 mystic intervals completed in 6 weeks, according to the Stromata, Clement Alexandria Stromata, Book 121, and this is at the last verse. Now, interesting, because Clement, 1st century Clement, is saying that the genealogy, which begins with Abraham, is continued down to Mary, the mother of the Lord. Now, that would give us 14 generations. But again, as we saw earlier, if we say that Joseph, the husband of Mary, is where it ends, and that's only 13. But Clement, for some reason, had the understanding that this genealogy goes to Mary, the mother of the Lord, and gives us 14 generations. So what do we make of this? Clement is making a claim that he's reading a text that puts Mary back to Abraham. That's her genealogy. And that Joseph, obviously, is the husband is given in Luke. So if Clement is right, we should have Matthew recording Mary, going back to Abraham, and then, of course, Luke dealing with the husband, Joseph, going back up. Now, this is where we get into the issue, because obviously if you look at any translation of the English Bible, if you look at the Greek text, it all says Joseph, as we saw, the husband. That is a problem, because we can't get that back to Mary unless we have a Hebrew text that shows, or more than one that shows, that Mary is going back to Abraham in the genealogy. And here's what we have. We got to look at this carefully. Again, Clement apparently is looking at a text that has a genealogy going to Mary, the mother of the Lord, back to Abraham, which gives us 14 generations. So let's take a look here and see what we have. We have this first text from Oxford, a Hebrew Matthew, and I put the arrows there for a reason. This is a single text. It only records the genealogy. You can find it online, but you can see the arrows on the left and on to the right. It says, if you can't read Hebrew, I'm going to read it to you. Joseph, Avi Miriam. Joseph, the father of Miriam. Now, that is critical, because here we have a Hebrew text that puts Joseph is not the husband, but is the father of Miriam. Now, Joseph, again, in the 1st century, is a common name, a common Hebrew name of the 1st century, just like Yeshua, Jesus, was a common Hebrew name, just like Mary, Miriam. So this could have gotten mixed up in translation down the road with the Greek and all the other texts. And I think it appears that Clement might have been reading these types of texts in the Greek and in the Hebrew of Matthew, saying Joseph, the father of Miriam. So that's the first one. Now we have a second witness that says the same thing. Now this is at the Jewish Theological Seminary online. So we have one from Oxford and one from Jewish Theological Seminary. It says the same thing. The circle red says Joseph, Avi, Miriam. Again, a second witness pointing the fact that Matthew is recording the genealogy of Mary through her father up to Abraham, as Clement makes that point as well. Because remember, Clement says that we are talking about 14 generations to Mary, the mother of the Lord. And these two independent texts gives us that answer, and explains that this is Joseph, Avi, the father of Miriam. Again, there's no way other than these two texts to explain the contradictions with Clement of Alexandria. I think these are great. This is great evidence and great witness and testimony to the fact that we have now a clear understanding that Matthew records Mary's lineage with her father back to Abraham, and Lucas quote is giving us Joseph, the husband, back up to Abraham and even back to Adam, which again solves the problem, which nobody wants to really understand, that if you hold to the view that both texts of Matthew and Luke are recording Joseph, the husband of Mary, back to Abraham and beyond, then you have a serious problem, because the bloodline is not there. Joseph is not, once again, the biological father of the Messiah. Therefore, it's irrelevant to just record both Josephs, because you can simply say Jesus is not the Messiah because he doesn't have a descendant back to David biologically in a bloodline, unless you have Mary. And these two texts of Matthew give us that, and so does Clement of Alexandria of the first century. So again, I hope this helps clarify this. I hope people understand this and will use this to explain a contradiction that's been going on for literally probably over 1,500 years in the early church fathers who actually struggled with this, with the Greek text. This understanding, this debate has been going on since the 3rd, 4th century on. You can read this in some of the early church fathers, even to Jerome, that there was an issue here, and there was no way to reconcile it. And so it caused a problem. But again, going back earlier, we have these now 2 Hebrew texts and Clement who give support to these Hebrew texts as well. So I hope this does help. Please use them, share them. And again, we'll come back again with some other Hebrew nuggets for these texts that I'm looking at as well. And I want to say thank you for tuning in. Thank you for listening. And I want to say God bless. And this is Dr. Al Garza with Bible Answers.
Bible Answers with Dr. Al Garza.